Okay, we're in chapter 6, the second half of this unit, and it is all about the skin. Now, the skin is part of a major organ, so it is one of your largest organs, and it is only part of your integumentary system. A major part, right? When you think about integumentary, you do think about the skin, but it also includes these accessory structures like hair nails and the glands and all the receptors that go along with it. And don't forget that we call this a type of membrane. These membranes include both epithelial and connective tissue. And this was the cutaneous membrane. I told you you'd look real cute if you had skin and real not cute if you didn't, or you can cut it. Think of ways to remember this stuff. So we're going to have two layers of what we call skin. And it's the epidermis and the dermis. The epi, of course, means outside or top. So this is the outer layer, and it's above the dermis. And then the dermis, of course, is the lower layer. Let's try to get, okay. So what is the epidermis made out of? Well, it is your stratified squamous epithelium. We've seen a picture of it where there was just lots of layers of these flattened cells, and it's for protection. Under all those flattened cells, you'll of course find a basement membrane. And then if you cross the basement, you're now in the dermis. The dermis is going to be even thicker than the epidermis, and it's going to be connective tissue. You're going to see a lot of fibers, it's elastics, it's collagenous, and we'll see muscle there, blood, and nervous tissue within that connective tissue. Now below the skin, so if it were me, I would say this is skin, epidermis and dermis. Derm means skin. So this is the skin, this is the upper skin. Subcutaneous is below the cutaneous membrane. It's below the skin. This is not part of the skin. Hypo, we've seen that prefix before. That means below. This is below the derm, skin. So here's the derm, the skin, and the upper skin, and here's below the skin, the subcutaneous layer. And it is going to be for insulating. So what connective tissue are we going to find? Of course, we're going to find our favorite connective tissue, adipose. And then there's going to be some areolar tissue kind of allowing a lot of blood vessels to be there and stick things together. And so this is what it looks like as a cross section. So you can't tell that something's on here, I'm not sure what, but this is your stratified squamous epithelium. And so the basement's going to be here. Remember, basements aren't always flat, okay? So our tissues aren't just straight across. So there's our basement. And then you've got all this dense, irregular tissue. And then your adipose tissue of the cutaneous membrane. All right, this is a better picture. I like this one better. So you can see the epidermis is here. There's that basement membrane. So all these are flattened, stratified squamous epithelium. And then here's our dermis. And then here's our subcutaneous membrane. Oh, let me go back. I'm so sorry. Some other things you were going to see in here. This is a hair follicle with the hair shaft inside, and this is going to be some sebaceous glands that provide oil to the hair to help like waterproof it and not make it so rigid. You can see a lot of blood vessels in here, arteries and veins. This yellow stuff is nerve endings. Here's some muscle. So there's blood, there's muscles, there's nerve, and then there's connective tissue all in here. Here's this layer of fat that is insulating the body. And so with this skin on top. And here's a cross section of that. We'll talk about all of these parts and you'll label them in a practice. So let's go over the epidermis. Again, stratified squamous epithelium, and epithelial tissue never has blood vessels running through it. Remember, they're very packed, tight, close together. There's not room for blood vessels. The very deepest layers, so there's going to be layers of the epidermis, and there's 5 total, and they all have funky names. And I looked up the pronunciation for this. This is stratum basale. I've called it basale and basal, but it's basale apparently. And it is the deepest layer, and it is going to be really close to some blood vessels, so it will be well nourished, and because it's well nourished, it's able to grow and divide. And as this bottom layer divides, it pushes new cells upward toward the free surface, and these cells just continue to migrate, be pushed away from that nutrient supply. So what's going to happen as they get older, they start to flatten out and die, and they call those keratinocytes. Now we know this word means site, cell, and keratino. Well, why are they called keratinocytes? Because they are filled with keratin through a process called keratinization. So keratinization is this process of dehydrating the cell and hardening it, and it fills with this stuff called keratin. Now, keratin is a waterproofing tough protein that's stored in the cells, and so as they migrate up, as they're pushed away from stratum basale, they start to fill with this keratin and die. So partly they're dying because they're filling up with keratin, but also because they are further from that blood supply, that nutrient supply. Now the outermost, the top surface, so we're skipping all the other layers. From the top surface, they're tightly packed. They have some desmosomes sticking them together, and that's called stratum corneum. And sometimes they say they've been cornified because they have all this keratin in them. They're going to be, this layer is really thick on your palms and soles for the most protection, and it easily sheds from your skin surface. Its job is to protect against water loss, so it's waterproof, right? It has this keratin in there, so it's waterproof, and it keeps water in your body, so you're not just leaking water all the time. It keeps harmful substances off. It protects against injury and even bacteria or virus. So here are all the layers, and I put blanks in here because you need to know them, and I learned them from the bottom up. Okay, because this is where they start. Stratum basal, it's one row of what looks like cuboidal or columnar cells. Now, this is all stratified squamous, but we know at the basement level, they're not flat yet. So here's this single layer, and they're just dividing. And as they push cells upward, we're into what's called stratum spinosum. And so these stratum spinosum cells were not long ago stratum basale. So stratum spinosum are many layers, and they're just starting to become thick and fill with keratin. Hold on, I got to answer this phone call. So after some time, they're still filling up with keratin, and stratum basale is still cranking out new cells. So spinosum is pushed up to what's called stratum granulosum. And this is about 3 to 5 cells layers thick, and we're still gaining keratin, and even the nucleus is shrinking. And so really becoming flat at this point. Now, stratum lucidum, when you're lucid, you're very clear. And they call stratum lucidum this layer that word because these cells do appear clear. And I believe it's a very thin layer, but it's only found in thick skin. Where is thick skin? Your soles of your feet and the palms of your hand. That's the only place you're going to find this. So star this. This is test questions here, okay? You need to know the layers from deep to superficial. The question could ask superficial to deep, and you need to know what's going to be found in the palm or the soles of your hands. If we're talking about the skin on your face, it would not have 5 layers, it would just have the 4. And last, stratum corneum, which we already talked about. They're fully keratinized, they're totally dead and flat, and they flake off pretty easily. And so here you kind of see this going on. So here is this basement membrane, and you've got this single layer of dividing cells, so that's stratum basale. And then above that, you've got this spinosum. And then they start to flatten out and become granulosum. And then lucidum's this thin layer that are kind of clear. And then these dead cells on top are the corneum. And so here's what that looks like. Like lucidum, you can't even see it hardly. And so that is basement membrane. Can't see the basement membrane well, but obviously these cells are different than these cells. So this is dermis, this is epidermis, and together these two types of tissues make an organ called the skin. Excuse me. So there are some funky cells of the epidermis, Langerhans, Merkel, and melanocytes. So these dendritic cells or Langerhans, anatomy always names things multiple times, and usually it's by the way that it looks, where it's found, or who discovered it. In this case, we've got what it looks like. It's dendritic, it's tree-like, and then Langerhans, probably Dr. Langerhans who discovered these things. They are found in the stratum spinosum, and they are phagocytic. So they are helping protect the skin from infection and getting down into that blood. Think about blood is not here in our strata, but it is down low. So we're going to have a layer of cells kind of protecting things, and they look dendritic because they have all these pseudopodia coming off ready to engulf anything. Tactile cells are for touch, tactus, touch, and Dr. Merkel maybe discovered these, and they're found in the very bottom layer, stratum basale, and they have these nerve endings called tactile discs, and they can tell if you've been lightly touched, like a mosquito or somebody caressed your skin. And then melanocytes are found also in that bottom layer, stratum basale, and that's what these cells produce melanin. Melanin is a pigment that absorbs UV light, and pigment is color. And so if you're going to have any pigment in your skin, you're going to have some sort of skin color. And it is distributed to the keratinocytes from the melanocytes. It's kind of weird looking. Let's look at it. So here is that melanocyte right there in stratum basale, and it's got these little pseudopodia coming off, providing these other cells of the skin with melanin, a protectant actually of the nucleus. We don't want UV rays to hit the nucleus because that can cause some mutations and then perhaps skin cancer or other disease. And so that's what the melanin is actually doing. Notice this is basale, so it's constantly dividing. And so here you have a cell, it looks like maybe late anaphase, early telophase, probably anaphase because we don't see cytokinesis happening yet. And then you've got this tactile disc and this tactile cell, and this is what's going to feel like touch. And then here's the dendritic cell. It doesn't look much like a tree, but it's got these branches coming off, and that's going to phagocytize any bacterium that has gotten through here, these other layers of keratinocytes, before it can get down in here to where there is some blood in the dermis. So let's talk just a little bit about skin color, and I could stay here for a long time. I'm really interested. I love to study. So I'm into sickle cell, which has a relationship with. I'm having a lot of brain farts, but anyway, I've just done a lot of study on skin color and sickle cell and African populations and the connection with. Gosh, what's the disease from the mosquito? Y'all know it? You're probably going, duh, Miss Parker. Okay, well, anyway, this is kind of where I get excited. But there's actually not just one type of melanin. And so if you're not a brown skinned person, you've got melanin too. You're also, what do they say? Melanin queen, right? So eumelanin is the brown or blacker pigments, but pheomelanin is another pigment of melanin that's got more of a reddish yellow tone. And that's just because of the way that the light is absorbed or not absorbed in this color, this paint of the skin, if you will. But there's other factors that can affect skin color. You might not be the same skin color you were when you were born, and so you might develop more melanocytes based on your genetics, and so that would determine your skin color as you grow as an adult. Your size of your melanin granules can be bigger, and so that's going to cause more pigment as well. And then you might be born with albinism. You might be what's called an albino. Alb means white. And what happens with this is the genes that control production of that pigment melanin is messed up. And so you don't have melanin at all. And so you don't have the reddish yellow or darker pigments of the skin. So, but even more can change your skin color. Like if you stay out in the sun too long, your body's going, holy crap, there's UV rays. Let's make more melanin and let's get more protection on these nuclei. Of course, X-rays can do that. Any way you're getting UV and potential damage to your DNA. But there's even more reasons you can have different skin color. For example, how much oxygen is found in your blood. You know, if you have a lot of oxygen, you're kind of pinkish. But if you are being choked or you're in a very cold environment, you might have cyanosis. Cyan means blue. You could do vasodilation when like a really sexy person says hi to you. You might blush, or vasoconstriction because you're cold. You might eat too many carrots and start to have an orange tint because of carotene pigment. Or you could have a bilirubin issue and have some jaundice, a yellowing color. So there's all kinds of things associated with skin color. And I just love it. I just love everybody, and I love all the skin colors and learning the history of them and how they evolved. And we could go there, but we won't. Maybe meet me at PJ's and I can tell you about the evolution of skin color. It's really interesting. I do want you to know this. Usually these clinical applications, I'm like, hey, be aware of this. It'll come up later, but not tested on, but you will be tested on this. And so there are 3 types of skin cancer that you want to know. Tanning beds, laying in the tanning bed one time increases your odds of getting cancer by like 40%. That's just one time in the tanning bed. So stay out of those. You can now like rub chemicals on your body. I don't know how great that is for you, but it's probably better than the UV because you're just probably staining your keratinocytes and it's not getting into your dermis and your blood. Anyway, basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma arise from epithelial cells in your skin. Where? Well, basal cells from the stratum basale, and squamous actually I believe is from your spinosum. But these don't metastasize as quickly, but are pretty common. Melanoma is a issue from the melanocytes. So this is a cancer coming from melanocytes, and that's why they're very, very, very dark pigmented, very uncommon. Only about 4% of skin cancers are melanomas, but they have the highest risk of metastasizing and spreading and then causing death. And so SPF on your body, stay out of the tanning beds. We've been talking about epidermis this whole time, these stratified squamous epithelium. Let's talk about the dermis now. Remember that the dermis is connective tissue, and it's got these muscles and these nerves in it, and it's about 1 to 2 millimeters thick. It has these little projections we're going to see. Remember the basement membrane was not flat. It was like super curvy. Well, those are called dermal papillae, where these projections of the dermis come into the epidermis. And the dermis is really just sticking the epidermis to the other tissues of the body, the fat that's down there insulating it. Remember, we have blood supply here, so this is how that stratum basale is getting oxygen and sugar. It's literally by diffusion from the capillaries here in our dermis to go across the basement membrane into our epidermal cells. Here we're going to find our hair follicles and sweat and sebaceous glands and some sensory receptors like the Pacinian corpuscles and another tactile corpuscle called Meissner's for light touch. So we know a little bit about tactile cells. And so there are 2 layers. There were 5 total layers in a thick skin epidermis. There's only 2 layers in all dermis, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. And the papillary layer is where we're going to find these dermal papillae. And that is what causes your fingerprints. How cool is that? It is made of areolar connective tissue, and it's the superficial layer of the dermis, but it is deep to the epidermis and its basement membrane. The reticular layer is your deepest part of your skin. It's the thicker of the two layers here at the dermis, and it's made of dense, irregular connective tissue. And so you can see this papillary layer. Look at these dermal papillae. So that's actually, these ridges are happening here in the dermis, poking into the epidermis, and that causes the fingerprints. I love that. That's super cool. And did you know your fingerprints are developed early in development, and the number of those whorls, swirls, and ridges depends on the mental state of your mother, how much stress. The more stress, the more loops, whirls, and swirls. Anywho. So what do we see? We see our epidermis with our dead cells and the stratum basale, and right under that basement membrane, we're into the dermis. And the dermis has these papillae, like we mentioned, and then dense irregular tissue throughout. Let's see. Now this would be the subcutaneous layer. So that's not the skin, that's the fatty layer. But here's all these corpuscles. So there's Pacinian corpuscles here. Let's see. Here's that Meissner's corpuscle. So these are both light touch and deeper touch. There's going to be pain receptors. Here's a sweat gland. So look at it, this exocrine, right? So sudoriferous gland, it's going to secrete sweat out to release water for cooling and get rid of some waste as well. We've got a sebaceous gland right here associated with the hair follicle. So a lot going on. This is the erector pili muscle. Do you think it's striated or smooth? Let's see. So the striated ones are cardiac muscle. Is this in our heart? No. And skeletal muscle. Is this attached to bone? Nope. So this is smooth muscle. You don't control whether your hair stands erect or not, right? Which is why they call it the erector pili, because it's going to make your hair stand up when you're cold or scared or what have you. Okay. Let's move on from the skin and look at the accessory structures. That's your hair follicles, your nails, and those glands we kind of mentioned. So nails are these protective coverings on the ends of your fingers and toes. These need protecting because they are exposed and we use them a whole lot. There's 3 parts of your nail: the nail body, the nail bed, and the matrix. So the nail body is the part that you are painting, if you're into that. And it's the visible part, and it's all keratinized cells. That's why it's hard, it's waterproof, and it's most superficial. The nail bed is the surface of the skin found under that nail plate, and so that's where the nail plate lies on the bed. The nail matrix is actually where the nail is growing from, and you can't see it, but it's at the proximal end of your nail bed, so it's towards the cuticle, okay? Think about what proximal means, closer to attachment. The lunula, luna is a word that means moon, and so the lunula is the pale part, the half moon shaped region near your cuticle. And the reason it's that color is that's part of the matrix where the nail is growing from, and because the matrix is there, you can't see the blood vessels as easy, so it looks whiter because you just can't see the pink color of the blood in the blood vessels. Now your cuticle is actually a fold of stratum corneum that slightly folds over the nail and just adds some more protection to this nail matrix. And so this picture just gives me the EBGBs. But so what you can see is right here is the matrix area where the nail is the nail is growing from. So it's growing from here. The cells are dividing and they're getting keratinized, and then they become a hardened nail plate laying on top of the nail bed. And then this little white section is that lunula. This is the free edge, right, of the nail, and then your cuticle is right here. Now, hair follicles are found everywhere except palms, soles, lips, nipples, and the external reproductive organs, or parts of them anyway. And a hair follicle actually is this depression of your epidermal cells where the hair actually develops. It is going to go into the dermis layer, but it actually can go, if you have a deep hair follicle, into subcutaneous layers. So there's 3 parts of a hair: the root, the bulb, and the shaft. The root is what extends from the skin surface to the dermis and the epidermis. The bulb is the deepest part of the hair root, and it's where the cell's matrix is. What happened with the matrix with the nail? Remember, that's where the nail was growing. Well, the matrix is where the cells are dividing to make the hair in the hair bulb. And then the hair shaft is the portion of the hair that actually comes out of the skin, and you can see it. You can cut it, but the root is inside. Now, hair papilla, we've seen papilla before. We just saw dermal papilla. Remember these projections that go from the dermis into the epidermis? Well, the hair papilla is where blood vessels actually, it looks like a dermal papilla moving into the hair bulb. Your hair color is just due to the type and amount of melanin and the size of those melanin follicle granules that you have as your hair develops. The erector pili muscle, we know what that is. That's that smooth muscle attached to the hair follicle, and it responds to temperature, low temps, and fear, and this is what causes those goosebumps. It is smooth muscle. It is voluntary or involuntary? Which one? If you don't know, you need to go look at smooth muscle. It's involuntary. Okay, so here it is. There's that erector pili. Here's a sebaceous gland. Okay, there's that hair papilla. See how it kind of projects into the hair bulb? This region is the hair bulb. This is the hair follicle that the hair is developing in. And this is the hair root. Once you leave the skin, you're the shaft. What else? So that dermal papilla is where you're going to have some nerve endings, also feeding the cells in the matrix that are dividing to make the hair. And this is an actual picture of that. And we know about male pattern baldness, and andro means male, and generate. Alopecia is hair loss. So this is hair loss generated in males usually, and it is associated with lower levels of testosterone or estrogen in women. So if you're a woman and you lower your estrogen, you will start to actually grow hairs in places. The progenitor cells are lacking in the bald spots, but stem cells are still there, so they can be prompted to develop into progenitor cells, they think. There is, you might have heard of alopecia areata, where the body actually attacks hair follicles and you lose patches or large areas of hair. So let's talk about the skin glands. We already know about sebaceous gland and that it's a holocrine. Remember, the whole cell is released and it's very fatty. It makes something called sebum. So this is oil glands, and if you have too much of them, you can have acne, and the purpose of it is to soften and waterproof your hair and skin. We don't have these on the palms and soles, or we'd be slipping and sliding all over the place. And so here is a piece of a hair follicle, and this big glandular structure right here is that sebaceous gland. And then if you've dealt with acne, you might want to pause and read about that, but won't be a big part of your test, or much, if any, of it. Sudoriferous glands are fancy talk for sweat glands, and they are all over the skin. They originate in the deep dermis or hypodermis and these coils, and then they have a duct that leads to the outside. There is 2 major types of sweat glands. There's eccrine and apocrine glands. Now, eccrine are the most numerous ones. They're the ones that are helping you sweat out when you're hot to release temperature, high temps. Apocrine sweat glands are only found in your axillary region, remember where that is, and groin areas, and they do open into hair follicles, and they're called apocrine, but they're actually Mericrine, but they respond to emotions and pain, and they have protein in them. Make a note of this. These are the ones that have protein. It's not clear liquid. The protein is what bacteria are able to eat, and then the bacteria produce waste, and that's why there's going to be an odor associated with the apocrine sweat glands. We've heard of ceruminous glands, the earwax, and mammary glands that make milk. And so here you can see Mericrine sweat gland and an apocrine sweat gland. And so notice that it is associated with hair follicle, and this is the one that's going to have the protein in it that causes bacteria to grow. And this is just to relieve heat through the loss of water. And so here are the glands of the skin. So what does the skin do for you? I mean, it's so important. Number one, it's your protective barrier from microorganisms. Without your skin, you would die very quickly of infection. In fact, that's the issue with burns, is pieces of your protective skin is missing, and pathogens can easily access the blood supply and then your whole body. But it also protects, right, with UV radiation, with the melanin of the skin, water loss with the keratin. It allows you to sense things, to feel touch, different pressures and temperature, and neuroreceptors tell you when there's pain. It does excrete some waste. It also helps you produce vitamin D, and it doesn't it's the precursor to making vitamin D. So it helps you absorb calcium from your diet. And the issue with a lack of vitamin D, you could have rickets. And this is why darker skinned folks don't live closer to the poles, northern regions, because there's not as much light. And because there's low levels of UV up there and they have all this melanin, they're not getting enough UV to help with this calcium absorption. And what happens is they have what's called rickets, where their bones maldevelop and they end up, it's a sad sight. But your skin also, as we've talked about, regulates body temperature by sweating, and also, making goosebumps and trying to thicken up the skin, changing the flow of the blood. So heat production and loss is important, and a slight shift can have major changes. The set point is monitored by your brain in a place called the hypothalamus. The deep body temperature usually stays close to 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 Celsius. And then we have these homeostatic mechanisms that regulate that. And so we're thinking of negative feedback, I hope. There is a few methods of heat loss through the skin. I normally do not test on this. But when your body temperature rises, there's thermoreceptors tell your brain, and what you do is you vasodilate the dermal blood vessels. So dilate means get bigger, vaso is vessel. So make those blood vessels bigger, more blood flows to the area. Remember, blood has a lot of water in it, so the water holds heat, so heat can be released. And then we stop vasoconstriction to deep blood vessels because we don't need the blood to stay in our core. We need it on our superficial areas, so to release the heat from there. And then the sweat glands are activated. But when the temperature falls, have you ever sweated too much, right? And you get cold. So the hypothalamus tells you, hey, let's constrict those dermal blood vessels, dilate the deep ones, keep the blood deep, and the sweat glands become inactive. And this is where you might shiver and those smooth muscle contraction of the erector pili may occur. And so this is that negative feedback loop for responding to temperature. There is an issue if you go out of the range for too long. Hyperthermia, remember that prefix hyper means high. So this is an abnormally high body temperature, and this can make you feel hot and sweat a lot. And if you're dehydrated, it will make you more dehydrated. You become dizzy and weak and nauseous, and your pulse goes up. The opposite, hypo, we've seen that prefix before when we talked about tonicities, but hypothermia is low body temperature. And so can be from illness, or even, of course, most people think of the cold. We start to shiver. We might have some confusion and lose consciousness, and eventually your organs do shut down. Things slowly move and you die. Fun story, right? But I do want to talk to you a little bit about fever. Fever can be a good thing. It is part of your immune response to fight infection. It actually speeds up the process of some chemical reactions and then disables bacteria. And so even as a parent having a baby, knowing this information, being a biology major, my baby has fever and all that information goes out. I just want to get the fever down. You know, a little fever can actually help the baby get better and get over whatever infection they're fighting. We mentioned how important the skin is for protecting the body. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about inflammation. Inflammation due to histamine, remember that has those mast cells release it, is going to happen when you have some type of injury or stress to these cells. And what they're trying to do, this reaction, is to increase blood flow to the area of damage and stop blood flow from going anywhere else. Let's stop the spread of infection. And the blood vessels become very leaky, and so that's what makes it look swollen. And your skin will be swollen. It'll be reddened because of extra blood flow to that area. It'll be warm because of the extra blood flow. And it's painful because the swelling is touching some pain receptors. More on that when we talk about immunity in AMP2. So a little bit about cuts. A shallow cut is only cutting the epidermis. No big deal. Think about a paper cut. The cells will quickly divide and take up the gap that you left. But a deep cut is going to cut into the dermis, or even deeper into the subcutaneous level. And you know you had a deep cut when you're bleeding because you've broken some blood vessels. And that release of the blood is eventually going to form a clot. Now, a clot is fibrin, blood cells, and platelets all stuck together. And when they dry, you have a scab. Now, the epithelial cells are still dividing under that scab, filling in the wound, making collagen fibers to bind the wound together and add extra protection. And sometimes you make too much collagen fibers, and that is called a scar. And so this is how a wound heals. So we have a wound, we clot it, the blood clot dries, forms a scab, and we might have some scarring. Burns are also going to be on your test. There are 3 burns that we'll talk about: the 1st degree, 2nd degree, and 3rd degree. So your 1st degree burn is a superficial burn. It is only injuring your epidermis. So you're going to feel hot, you're going to be red, but there's not going to be any blistering because you haven't passed across the basement into the dermis. You will heal pretty quickly and there won't be any scarring. Now, a deep partial thickness or 2nd degree burn does destroy the epidermis and then damages some of the dermis. And so this can be from the sun or hot liquid, and this is where you will blister. And depending on how bad this blister is how long it'll take you to recover from that. But usually you do recover and don't have any scarring. A full thickness or 3rd degree burn is where you've not only destroyed your epidermis and dermis, but you've destroyed some accessory structures, and you're not going to be able to heal this on your own. So you're going to require a skin graft or some substitute to help you stop infection, really is the problem. And the way doctors estimate how much of the body is burnt is by the rule of 9s. And so we divide the body into 11 sections, and each section is worth 9% of the body. And so that gives you 99%. Where's the 1%? The one place you wouldn't want to get burnt, okay? So your perineum, this area. All right, so the head is 9. The anterior front is 9, and the back is 9. Abdomen front is 9, back is 9. So the whole front of the trunk, 9 plus 9 is 18. The whole trunk of the back is 18. Each arm is 9, so not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the whole arm is 9, the whole arm is 9, and then the front of the leg is 9, and the back of the leg is 9. So let me count the 11 parts. Head, 1. I mean, that's an important 9% though. So this is one part. Upper chest, let's say. Pectoral region, 1. So 1, 2, abs, 3, upper back, 4, lumbar region, 5, and gluteal region. Front of leg, 6, back of leg, 7, front of leg, 8, back of leg, 9, one arm, 10, one arm, 11. And that's going to be 99% of the body. And then, oh my gosh, this one, a student said, what if they only burnt the 1%? I said, they need psychological help as well. Something's not good here, right? So what happens to your skin as you age? Well, things become thinner. This is why older people usually become more cold. There's going to be some age spots. Lack of collagen and all these fibers causes wrinkling and sagging. You have less oil, so your skin's more dry. Not going to produce as much melanin, so your hair becomes gray or whitens and you have less of it. You don't sense things as well, and dang it, you don't produce as much vitamin D, and it's not fun. But enjoy it, because what's the alternative, right? All right, y'all, we're under 45 minutes for the entire chapter 6 on the integumentary system. You will not have a lab for this, I don't think. Just the practice and a test over both chapter 5 and 6. Best of luck.